I went to bed on Friday night after a normal day. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I went to school, talked with Jess, did my homework and used the computer. Everything was as it should be, but for some reason, that night was different. I went to bed at 9 o'clock and woke up around 2 in the morning. It was cold in my room, so I think that woke me. Not freezing cold, but still colder than I remember it being when I went to bed. I sat up to survey my room and noticed my window had been opened. Slenderman? I questioned into the empty air. No response, except for the wind rolling in the open window. I was a bit freaked out now. Slenderman had never went into my room at night, but in my sleepy head I just assumed he had. Or at least he had opened the window. I tossed my covers off, ready to get out, and closed the window. I stopped when I heard breathing. I looked around my room again. It was too dark to make out anything more than a foot away from the open window. Hello? My shaking voice called into the darkness. Again, no response. But I did hear the breathing persist. Perhaps I was just imagining it. Yeah, that was it. I felt a bit more relaxed now. I turned, my bare feet hitting the cold ground. I leaned my weight forward to stand up. But I stopped dead at a sudden chuckle. It was quiet. The soft laughter I heard in countless horror movies. Like a maniac stifling his excitement. I stopped and looked around again, straining my eyes to see anything. My hand absently ran across my chest, feeling the scars left by the rake. They were reminded that it was always something. The laughter came back, this time slightly louder. It sounded downright giddy. I squinted, hoping for even the slightest glimpse of a figure, but I only saw black. I leaned forward again, going through in my head the quickest way to turn on my lights. I stood very carefully, as if I was walking on ice. Then I heard it. Words full of a sadistic giggle. Go to sleep. I choked up. Had I heard that right? It was soft, faint, but still audible. I was about to scream when a hand shoved against my face. I fell back onto my bed, something pulling all its weight on top of me. Cold metal pressed against my neck, and now it was close enough to see. Two large, nondescript eyes with thick black rings around them. Ash grey hair, albino pale skin. And a Glasgow smile. Go to sleep, the attacker said again. Their voice was forceful, commanding over all the laughter. I knew Slenderman would show up and save the day. He always did. I had no real fear anymore. Right on time, a black tentacle came through the open window and pulled the freak away from me. He looked like Jeff the Killer, so I'll just call him Jeff. I have no idea if he's the real one from the stories or not, but let's just call him Jeff. Jeff was pulled off of me, and I stood up. I flickered on the lights and walked to the window, rather casually, to watch Slendy take care of him. I was very confident for someone who just had a killer on top of me, so what I saw, that really made my heart sink. Jeff had, and I had no idea how, gotten away from Slenderman just long enough to start running. Slenderman was chasing him, but not fast enough. I suppose Jeff's short size gave him the upper hand there. He made his way into the trees and I slammed the window shut. Now shaking, I walked down to my living room. Jeff was out there. Jeff had eluded my protector and I knew he'd come back. Sleep was no longer an option for me. I watched late night TV and jumped at every noise, not originating from the shows. After the sun peeked over the horizon, I felt more at ease. I crept back to my room before the parents could get up and passed out. The next night, I was still shaken. Spring break was the upcoming week, so perhaps I could become nocturnal for a while. Instead of going to bed, I sat on my computer with the lights on and my back to the wall. I'd look up from my screen and I saw nothing the first few times. It's funny how being reassured several times over is broken by one semi-glimpse. I wasn't so sure it was nothing. It wasn't a face or a knife. Maybe it was a hand. Or it was probably a leaf just floating by or something. Those kinds of thoughts are what got Herb killed. The memory made my chest burn where the scars were. It was true. Nothing was always something. As long as something was still out there, it was coming for me. Slenderman might play watchdog for me, but clearly things slipped under his radar. I wondered how many monsters had actually targeted me that Slendy was able to stop. Maybe the four I'd encountered were just a tip and I'd actually been attacked hundreds of times, but Slendy stopped them all before they got to me. A bang on my door took me from my trance. I saw a face there. The horrible face of Jeff. I screamed this time, loud enough to wake my whole house. I expected to hear footsteps rushing to me. There were none. I hopped to my feet and rushed to my window, quickly opening it to the abysmal black before me. I took one look back to see him rush through the door like a beast. I jumped. From my second-story window to the ground, rushed towards me. I hadn't moved my body properly and was heading face first to the dirt. I nearly jumped out of my bed, gasping and sweating. My heart raced as I lurched over, gripping my chest. I could feel the blood pound through my ears, my mouth filling with spit like I was about to vomit. A nightmare. I dozed off and had a horrible nightmare. That was all. I looked back to my window, almost laughing at how stupid I was. Then I saw his face. Only for a moment. It was followed by a dark tendril whipping against him, and then Jeff was gone. I almost didn't get up to look, but I knew I had to. I saw what I was dreading. Jeff ran back into the woods and avoided Slenderman once more. The next few nights were all the same. I'd stay up late, see Jeff well into the night peeping through my window, and then see him run up with Slenderman, chasing him down. I was starting to get really annoyed. It was Wednesday and I had already told my parents, but they just figured I wasn't sleeping well enough because of reading too many creepypastas. You'd think after the Rake, the thing that stalks the fields, and SCP-173, they'd get the message, but as expected, my parents didn't want to believe me. And so, in a sort of annoyed sleepiness, I decided to kill Jeff myself. I had my air rifle that shot copper BBs, the same one I used when I first encountered the Rake, and I figured it would take out Jeff in a few shots to the chest, or at least slow him down enough for Slenderman to get him. I stayed up that night with the rifle under my blanket, and waited. I waited until I saw his eyes in my window. I'd left my window open and had warned Slenderman about what I was doing. When he popped up, I quickly got my gun ready and fired. The BB hit him in the forehead, drawing blood and sticking in his skin. Jeff climbed through my window as if nothing had happened. I pulled back the bolt, firing again and hitting his chest. It tore through his hoodie and he winced. So it clearly entered his body, but he showed no signs of stopping. I jumped to my feet, dropping my rifle and rushing to my door. I could practically feel his knife against my back as I ran out the house. He followed me into the street. He followed me down the road. He followed me as I rushed by closed gas stations and empty parking lots. I kept looking back, seeing him laughing and swinging as he chased me. Where the fuck was Slenderman? The hard pavement wore against my bare feet. The cool air rolled against my chest and arms. I was panting, gasping for breath. I had to make it to the police station or the hospital. Something. Somewhere that had 24-hour response. In my small town, all the stores were closed by midnight, at the latest. My mouth was all dried up and my calves started to feel like they were being ripped apart. I was about to collapse when I first saw the firehouse come to view. It was well away from any of the stores, but I knew it would have someone inside. I rushed up to the door and slammed my fist on the door, gasping for air. I looked back to see Jeff closing the distance quickly. I noticed something else. Slenderman. He'd been following us the entire time, but he wasn't quick enough to get to Jeff. It explained how I managed to outrun him, if Jeff had been trying to dodge Slenderman too. The door opened. A large man in a blue shirt and heavy orange pants answered with a confused look. I rushed in the building and collapsed into the ground. Jeff stopped and looked up at the man that looked like he could punch a hole in a jeep and stop dead. I thought he was going to run away, but I suppose he was crazier than I thought. Rather than flee, Jeff threw his knife and caught the man in the leg, only the black grip sticking out. A screech of pain followed and I was back to my bloody feet. I pulled the man inside and slammed the door closed, leaning the firefighter on the hinge metal, the only thing between us and Jeff. The other men who were working the night shift had come and called an ambulance for the wounded firefighter. I insisted I go with them. And so I spent the night in the hospital. I had called my parents and told them what happened. I told them not to worry and to just pick me up in the morning. Sure enough, only about half an hour after a daybreak they were there and brought me home. My feet had to be bandaged, but I was otherwise fine. I came home to a very happy sight. Jeff's body slumped against the side of my house. He wasn't dead. He was asleep. He must have thought he'd catch me coming home and then get me. I suppose a human, because that's exactly what Jeff was, had to sleep sometime. And he sure as hell was not sleeping at night. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't call Slenderman. I needed to take care of this. I needed to be able to handle something myself. I used a rock from the ground that looked big enough to bash his skull in. After the first hit, he woke up and looked at me. I almost saw sorrow in his creepy eyes, but I ignored it. I was hardened by that point. Another swing broke his jaw and nose. He was gargling on blood and tried to get up. I delivered a sharp kick into his ribs, followed by a final blow to his temple. The crack was sickening. I dropped the rock and went inside to call the police. I really wish I could say Slenderman killed Jeff. I wish I could say he was always there and everything would be A-okay with my protector around. I wish I could say that. But Slenderman isn't a god. He's no man, that's for sure, but he clearly can't do everything. I am a killer. And at night it's really bad. Not from guilt, but from the things I hear. There are some willow trees out in the woods behind my house. Lately, I've been having dreams about them. Dreams about strange figures standing on their branches and watching me. Dreams on being called guilty by them, and just before they tear me apart, I wake up. God, I hope these nightmares end soon.